Hello everyone, and welcome to the 102nd episode of Analyzing Evil, featuring Blondie, Angel Eyes, Tuco, and the horrors of the American Civil War found in the good, the bad, and the ugly. My personal favorite film of all time, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, is perhaps the most famous film created by the legendary director, Sergio Leone, and for good reason. Considered by many people, including Quentin Tarantino and myself, to be the greatest film ever made, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is beautifully shot, scored, and acted from start to finish. And while it does have its flaws, and it might not be the most groundbreaking film ever made, it's certainly one of the most consistent in its vision, telling a nuanced story of layered morality and powerful themes that is nothing short of awe-inspiring. In accordance with its themes, there is not one out of the main characters in this story, and precious few side characters, who can be said to be absolutely morally sound, even if one of those characters is referred to as the good. And so in this video, we'll be examining the personalities, actions, and moral positions of the three titular characters, as well as taking a bit of time to discuss something that is frequently presented to us in this film, the horrors of war. To do that, we'll be looking at the extended version of the film, which does give us a bit more to work with, and we'll be covering each of these characters in order of their titular appearance, with the section on war being the last part of this video, before the conclusion. Now without further ado, let's begin.
Such ingratitude after all the times I've saved your life.
Now let's start with the nominally least evil character of the film, Blondie, the man with no name. Silent and brooding, Blondie is handsome and quietly charismatic, the stoic gunslinger who, comparatively speaking, conducts himself with more dignity, respect, and compassion than the many other outlaws that were presented with in this film, which is especially prevalent in his desire to blow up the bridge the captain and his regiment are fighting over in order to save thousands of men, his comforting of Tuco after he's fought with his brother, and in his willingness to offer a dying man his cigar and poncho before he passes. While these things are true, Blondie is still an outlaw, and when you take a step back and examine his actions, his humble attitude and reserved demeanor start to mean less and less. When we first encounter Blondie, he's seemingly acting as the hero, saving Tuco from the clutches of three bounty hunters looking to cash in on the reward on his head. Except Tuco isn't really a man worth saving, probably not any more than the men who died to preserve his life. And Blondie isn't saving him here out of any perceived sense of justice. He does so because he wants to claim the bounty on Tuco's head for himself. Though rather than turning him in outright, he does strike a deal with Tuco wherein they can keep cashing in on the reward on his head after Blondie saves him from the hangman with some careful sharpshooting. However, that's not exactly a good thing either, as now, instead of taking a bounty for himself, he's running a con game with another fellow outlaw. And during their escapades, though Blondie is quite the good shot, every time he engages in this behavior with Tuco, he risks harming others, all for the sake of lining his own pockets, shooting the hats off of innocent bystanders that could have very well ended in a few missing heads. Still, his scheme with Tuco could be construed as being the actions of a man who is operating in a tough world, where if one wants to get ahead, they must engage in some unsavory behavior. And perhaps Blondie is even a man who only takes advantage of government institutions that he has no respect for, as outside of defending himself from men who attempt to kill him, and the three he kills to save Tuco, the only crimes we see him commit in this film are in one way or another committed against government officials or government institutions. This is surely a possibility. However, what really shows us that Blondie likely isn't an honorable outlaw sticking it to the man is the fact that there is one crime he consistently commits against the aforementioned fellow outlaw, Tuco. Now, as we'll be discussing shortly, Tuco is far and away from being an innocent person who doesn't deserve a good amount of punishment for his many crimes. And it's not so much Blondie's mistreatment of Tuco that's the issue here, as again, by all accounts, he deserves to be abandoned in a desert to die of dehydration and be consistently treated like the scoundrel he is. But it's the fact that Blondie is willing to treat Tuco this way that's the problem. A man who is only a few shades darker on the criminal paint swatch. His first and greatest offense committed against Tuco is of course his abandonment of him in the desert after Blondie decides to conclude their business together, and is the basis for my claim that Blondie isn't exactly the greatest person in the world. Now, for example, if Blondie had abandoned Tuco after learning about his many crimes and decided that he didn't want to associate with a man like that, it would be a different story. But he was well aware of what kind of man Tuco was, and he still chose to work with him anyway. So how noble and honorable can a man be if he strikes an agreement with another and then abandons him to die once he decides it's not worth his time to work with him anymore? And not only that, but take enjoyment out of doing so, as he's quite facetious when he tells Tuco that he believes a man like him could survive a 70-mile trek through the desert with no supplies. So no, Blondie probably doesn't deserve the moniker of the good, but he is still the lesser of three evils, and that's quite apparent when you examine the actions of the man with the piercing eyes, one that manages to embody the legendary villainy of the cruelest outlaws ever to set foot in the American West. Angel Eyes, the man whose entire being emanates a ruthlessness that's only marginally softened by his namesake. Carrying himself with a quiet confidence and self-assuredness that screams danger, Angel Eyes, from the moment we meet him, intimidates us with his body language alone, casually conversing and eating with a man that he's been contracted to kill at his dinner table, as if it were a meetup with an old friend. What really sells his villainy, though, is his adherence to his likely only principle, that being that once he's been paid for a job, he always sees it through, killing this man and his son, even after he'd been offered $1,000 to not do so, and leaving with the money anyway. A brutal practice that ensures that no matter who that person is, be they woman, child, or man, and no matter how they might beg and plead, Angel Eyes will always follow his job through with a smile on his face. To his credit, he does take this payment as the beginning of a contractual agreement to kill Baker, but how much credit he deserves for that is minimal, considering it wasn't executed on the greatest terms. Angel Eyes proves himself to be much more than a killer, however. Not only do we see him beating a woman to extort information out of her, but when he set himself up as an officer at a Union prison camp, we learn that he's been torturing prisoners with the help of his lackey in an attempt to coax information about Bill Carson out of them, using the camp's band to drown out the sounds of their screams as they're beat within an inch of their lives. Now Tuco and Blondie are tame in comparison to Angel Eyes, as although Blondie is obviously willing to commit crimes for his own gain, as I said earlier, he does seem to be the least offensive of the three, and Tuco, though he's an animal, doesn't seem like he would have it in him to torture others to get what he wants, save for his revenge against Blondie, of course, though it could be that Tuco is a man who would engage in such behavior, so his virtue in this department is debatable. Angel Eyes, though, is a man who would undoubtedly do anything to get what he wants, and there's few lines that a man like him wouldn't be willing to cross, which combined with his intelligence makes him the most dangerous of the three. But our next contender does have a few reservations when it comes to operating as a criminal, even if they might be few and far between, as well as a lot less going on between the ears. Tuco Benedicto Pacifico Juan Maria Ramirez claims to have grown up in an area with little opportunity, one where, if a man wanted to escape the soul-crushing intensity of poverty, he had to either become a priest or a bandit. And considering we see Tuco reciting the phrase, "If you work for a living, why do you kill yourself working?" when he's searching for his gang members, it's no wonder that he chose the latter. Now, one of the many names that Tuco is often referred to by many different characters in this film is the Rat, and he does quite well to live up to that name. Unkempt, wily, and bombastic, Tuco is a shifty-eyed and vulgar scoundrel, clad in tattered clothing and time-worn boots, who's committed nearly every crime you can imagine. Murder, assaulting a justice of the peace, rape, statutory rape, derailing a train in order to rob the passengers, highway robbery, armed robbery of citizens, state banks, and post offices, theft of sacred objects, arson in a state prison, perjury, bigamy, inciting prostitution, kidnapping, extortion, receiving stolen goods, selling stolen goods, and passing counterfeit money, and using marked cards and loaded dice. And it's easy to believe that all these crimes that he allegedly committed, he did in fact commit, as Tuco does seem like the type of man who takes what he wants, when he wants, and never minds who he's taking it from. It's no surprise then that when Blondie abandons him in the desert, he chooses to do the exact same to him as revenge, which you can't really blame him for. But Tuco does certainly live up to his declaration that he'll basically return whatever is inflicted upon him back on the offender tenfold. And his accompaniment of Blondie on his trek through the desert to torture him further is a testament to that fact. Now, like a rat, Tuco seems to be a man who could survive nearly anything through a combination of his considerable skills as a gunslinger, fighter, and sheer luck, which is actually quite admirable considering the inhospitable environment that he inhabits. But with all of Tuco's crimes in mind, we can safely say that he is about as irredeemable as they come, committing crimes that would garner him a life sentence multiple times over, or worse. But there is something that he has that the man who serves as the ultimate villainy in this story does not: humanity. When we see Tuco reuniting with his brother, we find a man who is jubilant at their meeting, joking with his brother, and attempting to have a genuine good-natured conversation with him. His brother, however, is having none of it, and the reason why is revealed in not just Tuco's lifestyle, but his abandonment of his family, as in his 9-year-long absence, both his mother and father passed, and though he remains tough when learning this, he does enter a moment of despair at this revelation, tears in his eyes as he's lamenting the neglect he showed his family in favor of his life of crime, which greatly softens his character, even more so when he expands upon the care he showed his parents in his youth when his brother went away to become a priest, showing us that Tuco wasn't always a bottom feeder, and he was in all likelihood a man who simply got fed up with the circumstances of his youth and yearned to find something greater that could not be found at his home. Now these are our heroes, for better or for worse, and they all bring something different to the table as far as characterization goes. However, there's something that binds each of these men together that we need to discuss now, a concept that serves as the focal point of all the evil acts that they commit: greed. Greed can be found in nearly every action these men take. Why does Blondie kill people, endanger the lives of others, and consort with villains like Tuco and Angel Eyes? Greed. Why does Tuco lie, cheat, steal, and murder? Greed. Why does Angel Eyes mercilessly eliminate anyone in his path with a sadistic smile? Greed. These characters are all meant to serve the same, yet different purpose in this film, to show us the many layers of greed that can be found in men like them and how it affects their actions. Blondie operates as the stoic gunslinger who is able to mask his own evil through his outward displays of general kindness, amiability, and manners, the man who one could forgive for looking up to when evaluating him at the surface level. Tuco represents the thug, an impulsive man of low intelligence who was molded by the hardship of his youth into a man who refuses to lay down for anything or anyone. One who would rob the clothes off an infant and say a quiet prayer to himself afterwards to assuage himself of any guilt. A man who doesn't think much beyond his own carnal desires. Angel Eyes is the personification of intelligence turned towards villainy, a man who uses his wit to abuse others and take what he wants, enjoying it thoroughly in the process. So yes, they're all guilty of being greedy men, some more than others, and their wanton disregard for the lives of others in pursuit of enhancing their own is the glue that binds these men together. But there's a greater evil at work in this story that far outweighs anything that these men could accomplish alone or within a group, one that's also partially fueled by greed, and that evil is war. This topic deserves a very long and very involved video that I may or may not make someday, but within the confines of this story, we have plenty to work with as far as the horrors of war are concerned. In this story, we find men on both sides of this conflict suffering as a result of their soldiery, committed to causes both just and unjust. It's rare that a war is fought between two sides with equal cause for fighting the other, and this war was no different. Men committed to the Confederacy and the Union both bled profusely, and for what? For the abolition of a horrid institution that should have been recognized as such without the need for suffering and misery. Yes, which was a just cause, but that cause only needed to be fought for because there were men squabbling in far-off buildings about what should and shouldn't be, who refused to recognize the lives they used this chattel to be worth more than just that. Very few men who fought for the Confederacy owned slaves, as they themselves were more often than not poor men who would gain nothing but injuries, both physical and mental, from the furthering of their superiors' barbaric business. And in this film, we find men in the hundreds imprisoned in war camps and tortured by villains on both sides, men dying by the dozens as cannon fire rains over their heads and gunshots whiz past their ears, men starved and sick from horrid conditions left to die in the baking sun, sons and fathers, all lost to the horrors of war. Aside from the many soldiers that we find suffering or dying in this film at various points, there are two things in particular that really speak to how horrible war is. The first of those being the song that we hear being sung at several points in this film, The Story of a Soldier. Bugles are calling from prairie to shore, sign up and fall in and march off to war. Blue grass and cotton, burnt and forgotten, all hope seems gone, so soldier, march on to die. Bugles are calling from prairie to shore, sign up and fall in, and march off to war. There in the distance, a flag I can see, scorched and in ribbons, but whose can it be? How ends the story? Whose is the glory? Our comrades out there who sleep. This is a somber song that speaks to the tragedy that is the deaths of men both young and old who are forced to take up arms or lay down and die. Largely innocent people who have no choice but to fight for a cause they may have no wish to fight for, leaving their friends and families behind in the process to suffer an unknown fate as they anxiously await the return of their loved ones. Now, not every soldier lost is an innocent one, as there are always monsters on both sides of a conflict, oftentimes one side more than the other, but this song is for the majority who aren't, the men without a choice left to sleep forever in fields of battle. However, There are many who endeavor to lessen the load placed upon their brethren, and no one embodies that more than the captain that Blondie and Tuco encounter towards the end of the film. Here we find a man jaded and cynical, one who knows the value of the alcohol that he and his troops are continuously provided, so they might sail off happily to the slaughter that awaits them. Yet he remains hopeful that he might be able to save thousands of lives, not just on his side, but on the other as well. For he recognizes that just like the men fighting under his charge, the men on the other side of the bridge are in a similar position, and are no more deserving of unjust death than they are. And fortunately for the captain, with his last breath, he gets to enjoy the thunderous sound of countless lives being saved from slaughter. But our story ends in standoff rather than battle, and with the victors left to divide the spoils, and Blondie in a position to torture Tuco one last time, we're given a colorful send-off from Tuco as he bids a fond farewell to his dearest friend. And at this end, what is there to say about these men and all the evil present in this film? As for Blondie, Angel Eyes, and Tuco, there is much to be said about how what they do is not necessarily done specifically to sow evil. All three of these men aren't bloodthirsty murderers who kill for their own pleasure, or cackling madmen seeking to bring destruction everywhere they go. But no matter whether or not they're actively trying to commit evil acts for the sake of it, and no matter how dignified, or villainous, or scummy the man, all of them operate according to their own selfish interests, rooted in greed, and they do take their pleasures in fulfilling their ambitions in any way they can. So perhaps you couldn't label them as evil, but rather unrepentantly self-serving, men whose actions stem from the evil within themselves, actions that cause a great amount of suffering and misery, but ones that are saved from being labeled as direct expressions of evil, making these three anti-heroes more than anything. But war, I'll never have anything good to say about war. Every war fought is one that shouldn't have been started. I'm not a pacifist. I understand the necessity to meet aggression with defense, or to answer aggression with aggression when it's deserved. But that doesn't mean I have to like it, and this film does a great job of showing us why, as the suffering of the men within it tells the story of every war fought throughout our history, of suffering and pain, of loss and destruction, and heartbreak and tragedy. And while the three men who serve as our heroes in this story might be gray in their morality, the unimaginable pain felt by those involved in perhaps the most brutal reality of sentient existence is one that will always be shrouded in evil. Thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Analyzing Evil, and I hope you've enjoyed. What are your thoughts on the good, the bad, and the ugly? Did I miss anything? Let me know down below, and leave a suggestion for a villain you'd like to see featured while you're at it. If you liked this video, hit that thumbs up button, and make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. A big thank you to all of my subscribers, and to my patrons, and a most vile thank you to those whose names you're seeing on screen now. Join the channel's Discord server and Reddit to interact with myself and the community, and follow me on the social media platforms listed below to keep up with the channel. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll be seeing you soon.